No matter who you are or where you come from, wild animals treat everyone the same. No matter if you are famous and loved by everyone, an encounter with a predator in the wild can still be fatal. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. In today's episode, we go over 3 times celebrities were fatally attacked by animals. Welcome to Final Affliction.
It was September 4th, 2006, another day at work for 44-year-old Steve Irwin as he loaded his truck with supplies and equipment and set off for the Bat Reef near Port Douglas in northeastern Australia. He and his crew were preparing to shoot underwater footage for an upcoming documentary called Ocean's Deadliest for the Discovery Channel, directed by John Stanton. For several days prior to the scheduled shoot, John couldn't shake an eerie feeling that something bad was about to happen. He talked to his friends and producer requesting to call off the documentary, but the channel had already spent too much money on the project and could not afford further delays. But John Stanton still had an uneasy sensation that something would go wrong. He drafted a will and reluctantly set off for the reef, accompanied by Steve Irwin and his cameraman Justin Lyons. On the morning of September 4th, after arriving at the small town near Port Douglas, they boarded Steve Irwin's 75-foot research boat called the Croc 1 and sailed to the Bat Reef, near the Great Barrier Reef on the eastern Australian coast. The area hosted various species of marine life, including sea turtles, dolphins, and whales, but the crew wanted to encounter a shark to film for this episode, and so they donned their suits and put on their snorkels for a dive into the water. The sea was muddier than usual, and Steve and his cameraman Justin could not find a safe spot to look for a wandering shark. They decided it was best to call off the shoot for the day, as it was not the right time. But before they left, Steve Irwin spotted something that piqued his interest. It was not a shark, but a beautiful stingray. These marine animals could grow up to 5 meters or 16 feet in length, including a long, piercing tail of which they had great control and agility. It was their primary weapon in the underwater ecosystem. But Steve Irwin was not irked by the creature. He had been doing this his entire life and knew that stingrays were not known to attack humans unless provoked or accidentally stomped on. Steve swam closer to the animal until it was right beneath him. He thought this was the perfect angle to film some shots for his daughter Bindy's upcoming wildlife children's show called Bindy the Jungle Girl. He signaled his cameraman to swim down to him and start filming the animal. It was a serene sight. In the backdrop of the colorful ocean floor, stingrays had seldom been observed in such close proximity, as they would usually swim off or bury themselves in the sand upon encounters with humans. As Justin Lyons swam closer to Steve Irwin, they were blissfully ignorant of what was about to happen next. Steve Irwin was now only a few feet above the stingray, trying to work out the best angle to get a shot. But as he hovered closer, the stingray suddenly lunged its long, sharp tail upwards, slicing through Steve Irwin's chest. He didn't immediately realize the magnitude of the attack, and a numbing sensation engulfed his body for a few seconds. In the commotion of the water before they tried to swim back up, Steve Irwin instructed Justin to keep the camera rolling. Even in such dire circumstance, he wanted to get something out of the encounter. Justin Lyon, however, was painfully aware of what had just happened. There was a large 2-inch hole in Steve's chest, and he was now bleeding profusely, turning the surrounding water red. Fearing that the blood could attract a nearby shark, Justin grabbed Steve Irwin and urged him to swim up to safety. When they resurfaced, the gravity of his injuries became immediately clear. Steve Irwin was now in excruciating pain and losing blood fast. He screamed to Justin that his lungs had been punctured by the brutal attack, but the reality was far worse. The stingray's tail had cut into the side of Steve's heart, and the massive blood loss meant that he could lose his life in a few short minutes. Justin Lyons screamed to the crew on the boat that Steve Irwin was badly injured and needed help fast. The colleagues frantically threw him on an inflatable speedboat and quickly tried to get him to land. All the while they were with Steve, he displayed an indomitable spirit. He was losing consciousness, and as Justin and the crew forced weight on the wound to stop the bleeding, they called on him to stay alive for the sake of his family and his 2 children. Steve Irwin realized these were indeed his final moments and calmly said he was going to die as they administered CPR. A few minutes later, he stopped moving. His eyes closed and his face turned blue. Steve Irwin, famed wildlife conservationist and beloved TV presenter, was dead.
Got a beautiful white blaze on his chest. Oh. He thinks I'm gonna take the banana off him. I gave him the banana.
And what do you want to be when you grow up?
Just like my daddy.
Just like your daddy.
Australian crocodile hunter Steve Irwin has died during a diving expedition near Port Douglas in Australia.
He was a charismatic crocodile hunter who cheated death again and again.
Terry Irwin has spoken of the loss of the man she called the love of her life. In a statement read by Steve's dad, she thanked the thousands who offered their condolences, and she's decided his public memorial will be held where Steve felt most comfortable, the crocodile pen at Australia Zoo.
Paramedics were called on the shore for a faint chance of resuscitating him, but it only took them a few seconds to declare that Steve Irwin had succumbed to his injuries and passed away. Even if he had been taken to a hospital, there was little chance that he could survive a strike straight into his heart. The stingray's razor-sharp tail had cut through Steve's chest, and he died among the animals and wildlife he had loved and cherished his entire life. The entire ordeal, from the stab of the stingray's tail to the final moments that the paramedics were trying to revive Steve Irwin, were captured on Justin Lyon's camera. But in respect for Steve's fighting spirit and to save his family the pain of witnessing the scene of his death, Justin deleted the final copy of the tape after a brief police investigation. The footage was never seen or released, but the sight of Steve's horrifying and painful final moments remained forever ingrained in the memory of the crew on board and the colleagues that loved and cherished him. His wife and children were on a trip in Tasmania when they heard the news of Steve Irwin's demise, and they were devastated and inconsolable at the tragic loss of their husband and father. His wife Terry and his children Bindi and Rob immediately traveled to the Australia Zoo, which Steve Irwin had run, and were met with love and consolation from thousands of adoring fans outside. Steve Irwin had earlier remarked that he would consider his final purpose in life fulfilled if he could pass on the torch of nature conservation to his children. In keeping with their father's wish, Bindi and Rob became dedicated zookeepers and conservationists and worked to carry on Steve Irwin's legacy in honor of his tragic and untimely final affliction.
White tigers are legendary creatures of rare power and beauty. They are symbols of purity and strength, with their presence commanding respect and awe in equal measure. With only 200 of them left on the planet, those lucky enough to catch a glimpse are treated to the mysteries of nature as the ghostly beauty of the white tiger remains etched into their minds for a lifetime. It is for their unending beauty that these big cats have been a source of attraction to circuses since their first discovery. Their ability to jump through fire hoops and perform incredible stunts make them the stars of the show. Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn were stage performers who used live animals in their shows. The two met on a cruise ship in the 1960s before bringing their magic acts into the never-sleeping city of Las Vegas. Their shows, which featured acts involving cheetahs, white tigers, elephants, and lions, were unique and extravagant. Over 400,000 people would witness their daredevil theatrics on an annual basis. The crowds would guffaw with delight as the pair showcased their death-defying feats. To many, they were the magicians of the century. Over the years, the duo built a name for themselves, eventually signing a record-breaking deal worth $57 million with casino developer Steve Wynn. The 5-year deal entailed the duo staging a Broadway meets Barnum and Bailey extravaganza at the prestigious Mirage Casino and Hotel. For 13 years, they performed over 30,000 unique and extravagant shows to sell out crowds, amassing a tremendous amount of wealth. The pair soon were among the Vegas royalty, living in a palatial property that they called the Jungle Palace. Here, 63 tigers and 16 lions roamed freely at times sharing the bed and pool with Roy Horn. With this number, Siegfried and Roy owned 10% of the world's white tigers at the time. Since his childhood, Roy had a big place in his heart for animals. For most of the big cats on his compound, he had raised them from birth, building trust and friendship with them. He considered them his family. His love for these graceful beasts was so big that he meditated with at least one tiger every day. Siegfried was a technical wizard, an exemplary magician, and the brains behind illusions and magic tricks, while Roy was the animal master. He had a charming animal magnetism that allowed him to command the big cats with a flick of his finger. The pair completed each other. On Friday, the 3rd of October, 2003, Roy hosted a party at the Mirage Hotel Theater to celebrate his 59th birthday. Amid the laughter and company of his friends, he raised a toast to his partner, Siegfried, in celebration of the 44 years they had spent together. The mood was a joyous one, with a buzz of excitement in the air. But unbeknownst to them, what had started as a day of celebration would later turn into a night of horror. In the evening, Roy stepped onto the stage with one of his favorite tigers, Manticore. Manticore was born in Guadalajara, Mexico. Unfortunately, he had been rejected by his mother shortly after birth, and the duo had taken him in and hand-raised him. At 6 months old, Roy bonded with the cub and introduced him to their live shows. Their bond and trust had grown over the period, with Manticore performing over a dozen times alongside Roy. With well-rehearsed acts, the tiger provided something that marveled the crowd. He knew the drills inside out. However, despite performing thousands of shows, the duo had never encountered a serious mishap until that fateful Friday. The theater was a canvas of darkness, with a lone spotlight trained at the center of the stage. The transfixed audience held their breath with their eyes glued to the stage, and as the curtains gradually rose, they got on their feet, cheering and clapping as the figure of Roy and Manticore came under the spotlight. The theater was in full swing, alive with sounds of applause. Roy stretched out his arms, tasting the air as he acknowledged the crowd's applause. Being his birthday, he was ready to give the audience a truly memorable show. As Roy was leading Manticore around the stage, something in the audience startled the tiger. He broke routine and advanced towards the crowd, breaking free from his master's hold. There was no barrier between the stage and the audience, hence it was easy for Manticore to lunge at the occupants of the front row seats. On seeing this, Roy put himself between the tiger and the crowd. He then commanded Manticore to lie down as he tried to reach out and grab the chain around his neck. The tiger disobeyed the order and grabbed Roy's hand, sinking its canines into his flesh. With the free hand holding a wireless microphone, Roy again commanded Manticore, "Release." Manticore was resolute, and without warning, he swiped at Roy's feet, knocking him down. Roy came thudding to the floor. With a painful groan, he tried to get back to his feet, but before he could, the 400-pound Manticore pounced on him, pinning him down with its declawed paws. The tiger then opened its mouth wide open with its teeth glinting under the spotlights, and with a powerful bite, ripped Roy by the neck. To some of the audience, this was part of the act, but in reality, the bite had severed Roy's jugular vein, barely missing the carotid artery. The crowd gasped as blood shot all over the stage. On seeing this, Siegfried joined the action, shouting "No, no" to Manticore. He didn't listen. Instead, he dragged Roy 30 feet off the stage, literally like a rag doll, as a witness would later recall. Trainers rushed at the tiger trying to get it to drop Roy. They squeezed and swept a fire extinguisher at the tiger's face, but in vain. They then beat its head using the butt of the fire extinguisher, and eventually, Manticore dropped Roy as he retreated to his cage. The mood in the fully packed theater changed. The commotion had stirred a number of people in the crowd. Backstage, Roy lay motionless in a pool of blood. By the time the emergency medical officers arrived, his state was critical. He had lost almost 2/3 of his blood. In the ambulance, the medical team managed to stop the bleeding as Roy murmured, "Do not shoot the cat," before going to slumber. At the University Medical Center, he was quickly rushed to surgery. In addition to tearing his jugular, the tiger had also crushed Roy's windpipe and sliced his vertebrae. Roy suffered a stroke, and the surgeons had to remove a quarter of his skull in order to reduce swelling on his brain. The medical team fought to bring Roy back, as his heart gave up at least 3 times during the surgery. Siegfried was in shock. He couldn't picture the pain his lifelong friend had gone through. Back at the Mirage Theater, word had already spread through Las Vegas like wildfire. In a city full of risky gamblers, few were betting on Roy's survival. But against all odds, 2 days after the fatal incident, Roy began responding to questions. He answered by squeezing his hand once for yes and twice for no. For someone on the ventilator, unable to speak or swallow, he displayed the will to live. He recovered better than most people had anticipated. 3 months later, friends and family were in immense joy as Roy murmured his first words since that fateful night. After the attack, protests and outroar from animal rights groups propelled the U.S. Department of Agriculture to open investigations on the incident. They wanted to investigate any violation of animal welfare. The U.S. Department of Agriculture then proposed that the audience should be at a sufficient distance with barriers erected in the presence of such ferocious animals. On the other hand, animal rights groups argued that show animals be retired and released out in the wild. Roy spent his days in their jungle palace watching the big cats, but he was dissatisfied. He wanted to end the Las Vegas extravaganza on a high note, and so, 6 years after the incident, the duo made a miraculous return to the stage for one last act. Old and not as physically fit as before, the show didn't have the same energy and thrill, but it was still a fitting end to the duo's tremendous career. As for Manticore, he spent the rest of his days at the Jungle Palace until 2013, when he died from an illness. The German duo was deeply devastated despite their close encounter with their final affliction.
The eastern coyotes in Cape Breton Highlands National Park are larger than their ancestors. This is because as the creatures migrated from the southwestern United States to Nova Scotia in the early 20th century, they interbred with wolves in Ontario and Quebec. Since then, the genetic heritage has been retained and the creatures have become more robust, similar to medium-sized German shepherds. Although they are opportunistic creatures, coyotes are formidable hunters. They can stalk and kill even the sturdiest moose thanks to their effectively formed packs and high intelligence. Additionally, they are highly adaptable and very curious. This allowed them to live near human settlements, scrounging for any available food sources. With that said, coyotes naturally fear humans and will avoid them most of the time. But if that's the case, how do you explain the attack? Coyote attacks are incredibly rare. However, they do happen. In many cases, encounters occur because the people fed the coyotes or were rescuing their free-roaming pets from an attack. Moreover, the presence of pups in the area may elevate the negative behaviors of these creatures. Nevertheless, there are some unusual cases when coyotes stalk and hunt a person, as is the case of Taylor Mitchell. Taylor Mitchell was an up-and-coming folk musician in Toronto, Ontario. At only 19 years old and fresh out of high school, she had made a name for herself in the Canadian folk music scene. Once she realized her immense passion for music, Taylor dove into songwriting and performed her songs in various venues around the country. Success found Taylor and she embraced it fully, signing a record deal with Back Road Tavern Productions. In 2009, she released her first album, For Your Consideration, which received positive reviews. This release was accompanied by a solo tour of Eastern Canada, something Taylor was excited about after recently acquiring a license and a car. On October 28th, Taylor was scheduled to play a show in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. However, she arrived 2 days early. With a lot of extra time on her hands, Taylor decided to hike in Cape Breton Highlands National Park, one of the most stunning spots on the island. It was a sunny afternoon at the park. Taylor was an environmentalist who had always loved nature walks. Hence, the intoxicating beauty of the area was a welcoming distraction amidst her busy schedule. The dozens of hiking trails and the 93,000 hectares of land were madly inviting. Taylor started walking through Skyline Trail, one of the most popular ones on the island. Looping across the Gulf of St. Lawrence and returning near the entrance, nothing could be more ideal for Taylor. Although many people visit the trail because of its gentle slope and fresh air, others take the opportunity to watch wild animals in their natural habitat. Taylor wanted to do both. She was excited at the prospect of seeing beautiful wildlife, but at the same time she wanted to take a break from the hustle of touring. At around 2:30 p.m., Taylor left her car in the parking lot and headed up an access road. This led to a clearing where the Skyline Trail began. Approximately 15 minutes into her walk, she passed by a couple walking in the opposite direction. Unfortunately, this was the last time Taylor was seen unscathed. As they headed further down the access road, the couple spotted 2 large coyotes heading in the opposite direction. One of the hikers photographed them. Shortly after, they noticed something unsettling. They heard loud cries in the distance. However, they couldn't tell if it came from a human or an animal. If given enough distance, a loud coyote howling sounds eerily like a human's cry. The couple was disturbed by this, so they rushed towards the parking lot and called 911 from an emergency phone. At around 3:15 p.m., the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were alerted, and immediately an ambulance was dispatched to the scene. Meanwhile, the coyotes had caught up with Taylor through the access road. The creatures growled fiercely, half charging at her in an attempt to make her run. This is typical predator behavior, as running down a frightened animal usually allows the hunters to bite the legs and the rear of the prey. The 2 coyotes didn't see Taylor as human. They saw her as prey that day. Finally succumbing to terror, Taylor retreated towards the trailhead, accidentally dropping her items along the trail. While she screamed for help, Taylor took out a small pocket knife in an attempt to fend off her attackers. However, the coyotes were in hunt mode. They pierced her down, biting her legs and fingers as she desperately swung at them. Taylor was no match for a coyote, let alone 2 of them. The coyotes managed to push Taylor back deep into the trail and onto the top of a hill. Unfortunately, she tripped and fell, prompting the coyotes to attack full on. The ferocious beast tore at her clothes, biting her head and legs, and continued doing so until she was severely wounded. Taylor desperately ran towards the bathroom, her own blood trailing behind her. She panicked as she tried to open the bathroom door while the relentless attacks continued. Not able to gain entry, she ran towards the trees where she finally fell down from blood loss and injuries. Taylor was alone and helpless, and the coyotes took advantage of this. Meanwhile, back at the access road, a group of hikers saw Taylor's belongings and knew something was wrong. They headed up the trail and found her camera, so they started yelling out, but to no avail. Heading to the end of the clearing, they noticed blood and extra clothing. They also noticed the bathroom door was smeared in blood. Going around the corner, they saw Taylor, and a lone coyote standing over her. The hikers charged at the coyote in an attempt to save Taylor. However, the creature showed no fear and was even aggressive towards them. The hikers attempted again, and finally, the coyote ran away, but only a short distance. It stood still a few meters away, growling in anger at the hikers. Taylor was conscious and spoke to her rescuers, but she was in critical condition. There were multiple bites on her head and legs, and tears on her flesh were bleeding profusely. Finally, an officer from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived and fired a shotgun at the animal, effectively driving it off. The officer didn't finish the animal, as he initially believed Taylor was attacked by a bear. Taylor was immediately transported to the hospital, but despite the doctor's best efforts to save her life, Taylor's injuries were too much. She died from blood loss shortly after. In an effort to comprehend what happened, multiple speculations sprung up on why Taylor was attacked. Some theorized Taylor accidentally approached a coyote den, provoking the attack. Meanwhile, some thought Taylor might have tried feeding the creatures. However, none of these suggestions were proven, prompting officials to reassess the dangers these creatures posed to humans in the park. Consequently, the rogue coyote had to be hunted down and the wardens began their search. Surprisingly, Taylor's mother didn't want that to happen. She claimed Taylor, being an environmentalist, wouldn't have wanted the death of the coyotes. We take a calculated risk when spending time in nature's fold. It's the wildlife's terrain, Taylor's mother said in a statement after the attack. Nevertheless, an aggressive female coyote had to be shot down after acting aggressively. This was followed by 3 more, including a large male near the Skyline Trail. Afterward, a thorough investigation revealed that 3 of the coyotes were involved in the attack, evidenced by Taylor's blood on their fur coats. Moreover, the large male coyote was the alpha photographed previously near the access road and was the one standing over Taylor when she was found. This was evidenced by the shotgun pellets on the animal's coat, fired by the officer from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The aggressive female and large male may have been a pair and the other coyotes were their pack mates. Later, around November 2009, a coyote approached a couple close enough that the man was able to hit it with a stick on the head. Additionally, 10 months after Taylor's attack, a 16-year-old girl was bitten on the head during a camping trip with her parents. This was very unusual coyote behavior as they were generally seen as fearful of humans. However, experts weighing in on the issue stated that coyotes always lived close to humans. They were just undetected. Culling of the general coyote population was suggested. Still, experts opposed this, saying it wouldn't have any lasting effect as the creatures multiply tremendously quickly. One female coyote can give birth to 7 or more pups. Ultimately, Nova Scotia declared a $20 bounty on coyotes. However, this didn't apply to the park. Taylor's mother went on to establish the Taylor Mitchell Legacy Trust. This organization promotes community outreach for music and other art forms and educates people on habitat preservation. Although she met a tragic fate, Taylor was a beautiful soul who felt deeply passionate about music and the environment. The way Taylor's mother acted after the attack speaks volumes about how deeply she and her family understood the nature of nature. She may be gone from this world, but Taylor's beautiful music continues to live on despite the tragic and unfortunate story of her final affliction.